You know what? It's okay. As you could tell, I am not currently live. This is simulated live. Why? Well, because I'm driving the truck currently. It's probably right about 8 o'clock p.m. As you can see, it's very daylight. Right now, it's actually 10:16 a.m. And I'm sitting here in the truck, waiting for my hours to restart. I've got about 2 more hours, and then I can go. I'm likely getting a hot load that is going from Cleveland to Tennessee, someplace. An expedited load. So I'm just gonna chill, and I figured I would do a little recorded video for old time's sake because, well, it's simply been a while. Not really. It's only been a couple of days, but it is what it is. I just showered, so that feels good. I feel clean. It took forever at this TA in Pennsylvania. It took forever for the water to get hot. Like, when I say forever, I'm talking like I was pretty much done with the shower. I like at one point I decided screw it and just started soaping up in the cold water because I was like, whatever, it's not going to get hot. And it was at that point, right around when I started washing the soap off, that the hot water started to come. So it really sucks, but whatever. I feel clean now. It's been a couple of days. That's the thing about driving. Sometimes you don't get to shower every single day. I'm essentially out of food in my truck. I need to go to a Walmart and do some grocery shopping or a grocery store. I'm hoping that during a reset tonight, at some point after, in between dropping off, because I have to take a 30-minute reset before 8 hours driving elapses. And I'm hoping at that point that I'll be able to stop at a Walmart and go grab some food. Because yesterday, because of you guys, I was able to buy dinner. You bought me dinner. Thank you, Desiree. But I ended up buying Burger King, and it was delicious. It's the first time in a week that I've had anything other than rice and chicken nuggets, and I love it. Tastes amazing. I'm tired of the rice and chicken nuggets, but it is what it is and what it does. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I like this driving job. I do not like the sitting because I don't have anything to do. That's the big thing. There's very little I could do. I suppose I could work on the websites and stuff like that, but I'm just tired of doing that stuff. So I wanted to take a break. You can only watch so much TV before you get really tired of that as well. My classes, however, do start in roughly less than 2 weeks. So then I'll be busy. So whenever I'm sitting around, I'll just do homework and do all the reading and stuff. I'm taking a tremendous amount of courses for the fall semester. I'm taking 6 courses, 18 college credits, um, because I am dead set on finishing by the spring. And so it should be interesting. And yeah, I mean, so far, so good. I mean, I'm busting my butt out here trying to make it work. Yesterday, finally, after my persistence, um, the company actually paid to Deadhead. Didn't pay me, but they covered the fuel, so it's okay. To Deadhead from Connecticut to like the Youngstown, Ohio area. That's kind of where I am, and then because they have a lot of expedited freight out of here, so which is good, because I was tired of sitting, and I think now I know that if I go to Connecticut, Massachusetts, anything, I'm going to ask for $200 above their offer for fuel outbound. And so it may mean that I don't get the load, but I'm not going to sit there anymore. I'll tell them that I want fuel to get out of there and just go sit somewhere else, because sitting for 28 hours without a load to me, it's dumb. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's just me. What can you do? In terms of freight news, you may have seen that picture that I put on Twitter yesterday, of a flatbedder that had his whole bumper ripped off at a truck stop. That was in New York, in Newburgh, at a pilot there. And that pilot was incredibly, incredibly packed. It was a very, very busy place. And that truck was in reserve parking. But I noticed, because I didn't notice that the bumper was ripped off right away, but I noticed that the truck was sticking out quite a bit further than all the other trucks. And apparently someone tried to back in there. And then my guess is, because of how the bumper was ripped, my guess is they tried to back in, realized they weren't going to do it, and then, or tried to turn around and then ripped off the bumper that way. And I didn't see the driver, nor did I see the truck anywhere that hit him. So I thought that was interesting. And that's one thing. I know Dan, who watches these videos, he said something too. He doesn't like parking in truck stops that much because he's worried that his truck's going to get hit. When I park, like, for example, I'm parked in a truck stop right now. Last night when I got here, there were trucks on either side of me. I backed way deep into the parking spot because I'm not the same size as a semi. I'm about 20 feet shorter. So I ended up 20 foot shorter. So I end up backing up quite a bit more. So that way it gives these guys in the tractors enough maneuverability, a little bit more maneuverability to get their trailer in. Yesterday, there was a Schneider trailer that was at the other truck stop when I was sitting there waiting, which I don't know why. He came like an inch from my mirror. And it's crazy because he had the whole other side completely open. So why he was hugging my truck so much coming in, I don't really know. And he had an open spot in front of him, so he could have just pulled straight forward and then just back straight up. But apparently he just wasn't that great of a driver. So it is what it is. But yeah, there hasn't been. I've seen a lot of talk on Freight Twitter, FreightX, I think is what people are now coining it, about the market starting to rebound. They're seeing early signs of the freight market starting to rebound, which I hope is true. I personally don't believe it. I think, well, I do believe that it's going to rebound, but I believe it's being falsely attributed to Yellow's closure, because I think a lot of people they're looking for some sort of explanation for why the market is rebounding, as if that's the only reason it would rebound, right? So you remove the 22,000 trucks or 22,000 drivers from the marketplace, therefore you don't have such a surge in capacity, therefore rates would come up. Ideally, that's how it would work. But this is a segmented industry. It's LTL freight that they're talking about. So I don't necessarily think that has a hell of a lot to do with it. I think more so it's the fact that that the market's turning. But is consumer spending actually going up? Are people going to actually start buying again? I know, me personally, we're buying less, granted, because we don't have as much money as we used to. But just as a household, we're being a little bit more frugal with our money because we have long-term goals. And we know that the money that we expect to come in may not come in. So it's kind of like this weird catch-22 for us, and for just general Americans, what, I don't know. It's very odd. That's the only thing I could say. The whole situation is very odd. I don't think that the freight market rebounding has anything to do with Yellow, in my opinion. I don't think it has anything to do with Yellow. I don't think we're going to see any sort of increase based on Yellow's demise at all. And I know a lot of people want to attribute it to it, but I just can't, because data doesn't suggest, because freight rebounds every year. Granted, it didn't rebound as hard as it should, and it's been low for a long time, and diesel prices are going up. That's going to be an interesting thing too, because diesel prices are going up. Rates are not rising at the rate that diesel prices are going up. So does that mean that more trucking companies are going to have a harder time trying to afford to haul freight? I don't know. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, or at least for me, it's kind of interesting. It may not be that interesting for you guys, but I don't know. It's going to be the whole market's going to be interesting to see how the freight market rebounds and whether or not we're going to I think it's going to eventually. I think that people that like, for example, the people that made money over the past 2 years, and there are trucking companies that have, granted, more have lost everything, but there are trucking companies that have, because they had a good financial sense about them, or they had good direct freight or something like that. I think those guys they're going to bid very well as freight rates do come up. And I also think freight rates will come up. A lot of people are going to start making a lot of money, and then it's going to have the same effect that it did during COVID, where, people go out and buy trucks. They realize you can make money during COVID, or you can make money in the trucking industry. So people are going to go out and buy trucks. The one good thing is maybe we could curb down on the double brokering and the illegal brokering and all that stuff. And I don't know how, because if the FMCSA and DOT is not going to go after any of those people, I don't know how you're going to stop it. But, they issued their guidance, saying dispatchers are technically, not legit. So it'll be interesting. The market as a whole, when you think about it, it's really interesting because it's a whole industry out there that nobody really pays attention to. You know what I mean? Even everything from expedited. That's why I like enjoy doing this so much, because I've never done anything with expedited freight before. So for me, it's like it's interesting to see how it works. It's interesting to see, going in and picking up a load and then trying to make sure your hours are good so you can make that load delivery. Like this load that I'm going to be picking up in Cleveland, they want me. Well, for one, I'm not in Cleveland. I'm further away, and I had more drive time, but I had to stop for safety. Like this morning, they're like, "Oh, you didn't make it to Youngstown." I'm like, "Yeah, I had no choice. I drove till 2:00 in the morning, and I had to stop. I was too tired." But if I go to Cleveland and pick up the load and then have to run 500 miles to Tennessee, it's going to be interesting. Can I make a 658-mile trip in 11 hours drive time? Yeah, I know I can. Because even last night, I ran about 600 miles in 9 hours or 10 hours, something like that. So I did pretty good. I mean, I kept it pedal to the metal. I got a governor in this truck, so I can't pedal to the metal as much. But, I drove. I drove. That's what you do when you drive a truck. You drive. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. The whole expedited thing as a whole, like how they bid it and how much money is involved in like one pallet being moved or two pallets being moved, it's pretty interesting. To be honest with you, it's pretty interesting. Because some of the loads that, granted, I understand the load that I took to Massachusetts. I understand why they put it on semi or on these two straight trucks, my straight truck and someone else's. I know why they did that, because you would have had a hell of a time getting a semi in there, a 53, excuse me, or a 48 foot. You would have had a hell of a time getting it in there. Now, with this machinery and the medical equipment that was on the truck, could you have done a liftgate delivery with a 48 foot drive-in? Yeah, absolutely. Could you have shipped it with that? Could you have shipped it with a 48 foot flatbed cheaper than what you did on two expedited straight trucks? Yes, 100%. I already know that because I know the industry. However, would the carrier have gotten enough money to come out of Massachusetts empty? Because that's in our reality. When I used to send trucks to Massachusetts, we would drop the load and then we'd either run up to Maine to pick up water, or we just deadhead out because there's no freight there. There was just no freight in Massachusetts that justified it. Sometimes we take a fuel only load, and I say fuel only because like, for example, the load would pay $300 on 500 miles. We know we're going to cover our fuel coming back. There's no profit in it, but ideally we already made our profit going in. Do you know what I mean? So, but ultimately, and that's what I told them yesterday, the dispatch, when I was talking to them, I did. Even when I had my own trucks, we didn't sit in Mass because we knew, one, the freight rates sucked, and secondly, there wasn't a lot of freight coming out of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, that whole area. There's not a hell of a lot of freight coming out of there, especially not that pays anything decent. The most you're going to get is heavy ass water loads out of Poland Springs, and I'm not pulling any of that stuff in this truck anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's going to be interesting. One other thing, since I've been out of the freight market for so long, is this double brokering talk. I feel like for anyone that doesn't understand what double brokering is, and on the trucking side, it's a very big thing, but a lot of people are using it incorrectly and not understanding what double brokering is. Ideally, double brokering is illegal, but what a lot of people believe is double brokering, like for things that are happening right now in the market, it's not double brokering. It's called co-brokering, which is 100% legal. Double brokering is essentially when a motor carrier goes in, books the load as a broker, or as a carrier, sorry, and then puts the load through a brokerage to another carrier without the knowledge of the initial broker. That is double brokering, okay? And some brokers have no problem with it. Because if a broker tenders the load to a broker, it's called co-brokering. It's perfectly legal because it's on the tendering load broker. It's on him to figure out whether or not he's actually giving it to a carrier or he's giving it to a broker. Most, like, for example, Landstar, when I was an agent with Landstar, literally on their credit application for brokers, it had a co-broker agreement. So as soon as a broker would ask for credit, in which they did all the time, as soon as they asked for credit, it would say that we have the right to co-broker, or to, it's a co-broker agreement essentially on the load. So it's the whole thing is kind of interesting. A lot of people, however, don't understand the difference between a broker giving another broker a load to work on it together to co-broker that load versus a carrier misrepresenting that they're that they're going to haul that freight on their truck and then reassigning it to another carrier, usually double dipping on the profits, because a lot of people are so hyper focused on what everyone else makes in the freight transaction versus themselves. Which is something, I'll be honest, in the 17 years I've been in transportation, that has always been one of the main talking points, freight transparency, blah, 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 because nobody really has a firm grasp on an understanding of what it costs to operate a business. Because here's the thing, if I have a product and I go out and sell that product in a store for a certain amount of money, I don't have to tell the customers how much money I'm making to dictate the price that I'm selling, right? It's up to them to choose whether or not they want to accept the price that I'm doing. Now, there's this regulation that's out there, and it's an archaic regulation from the USDOT. It's in the FMCSA registry. And essentially, it says that a carrier has the right to review all pertinent information about a freight bill. So a carrier, which I don't understand why anybody would actually want to do that, because I wouldn't book a load or charge a carrier or charge a broker an amount based on how much that broker is going to make. No, at all. I would bid that load on how much I'm going to make. And if I can't make enough money, or if it doesn't make sense for me to take that load, I'm not going to take that load. However, a lot of people don't see that or don't feel the same way, which is very odd when you think about it. Because you would think that common sense would essentially kick in and people would be like, yeah, I got you. But I don't know. It's very weird. And then you do have people that are doing it illegally and just being criminal, right? It's where you accept a load from a broker as a carrier, then you give it to another carrier and misrepresent the fact that you're hauling the load to the original broker. And then you stiff that broker or that carrier that you hired and you don't pay them. That is incredibly illegal. And unfortunately, it happens so much. Or you have other people that are going out and hijacking loads, essentially, where they go out and they pick up a load and then they say, I can't deliver this load unless you pay me upfront for the money. That's done. And say, well, you're not getting the load. That freight hijacking has been going on forever. Freight bill hijacking, or whatever you want to call it, holding on freight hostage. You could find a million articles about that. That happens all the time, and it's been happening forever. There's been big lawsuits. There was one big lawsuit a year or two ago. I think it was Scotland or something like that, cold storage, where they hired a carrier to do a load. Carrier's truck broke down. Like an honest thing, carrier's truck broke down. Nothing they could do about it, right? So the broker had a clause in their contract that said that if they have to send in a recovery truck, you're not getting paid. We're going to pay the initial carrier. So then that carrier went and took another load from the same broker. Somehow the broker didn't, their compliance team sucked. They went and took another load from that broker and then said, you have to pay us for the previous invoice and this invoice. Otherwise, we're not delivering the freight. And then, so then they got paid, right? Or they were some sort of settlement. They got a little bit of money out of it. And then the freight was recovered by another carrier from a warehouse. Oh, because I think the broker initially said, no, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. They put the freight in a storage warehouse, and then the broker was able to figure out where that was and send in another carrier to do it and stiffed them. So then this other carrier, or the initial carrier that broke down and was holding freight hostage, he then used a chameleon carrier, which is another, it's the same company, just a different MC number. It's usually same trucks and everything. Or a big thing when they call it chameleon carriers, that essentially means, like, say one company gets shut down because their SAFER score, their CSA scores are horrible, right? And so they're on the verge of getting shut down by DOT. So what they do is they go out and they buy new insurance. They move all their trucks, the VIN numbers, everything. They move all their trucks to the new insurance company, and then they close down the old one. Then they have a new trucking company. But the problem is that that's also illegal because you can't do that. So But again, there's not a lot of enforcement of these regulations, where we already know it's illegal, but there's not a lot of enforcement of these regulations in the first place, which is crap, because they could do so much if they actually just enforced some of their policies. But they choose not to. That's their prerogative. But this carrier, and I think it was all in Florida, if I do recall. This carrier ended up sending in one of their shadow carriers, chameleon carriers, in to pick up a load from said broker. As soon as they picked up the load, they called and said, you have to pay off all the previous invoices plus this invoice, otherwise we're not delivering your freight. And it carried on like that for some time with multiple carriers. The craziest thing, when I was reading the court case, I was like, their carrier compliance team at this huge broker is horrible, is a really bad, like, fire them all. That's the first thing I thought when I was reading this complaint, because I'm like, how does one carrier dupe you so many times? When so many, I mean, there's things like Carrier 411 where you can go in and you can monitor a carrier. So if the phone numbers are similar, addresses are similar, VIN numbers are similar, common ownership, it'll tell you all that, so you could tell if another carrier is affiliated with another carrier. And so if you already have one carrier blacklisted and you're using a service like that, you can go and tell that this new carrier that seems awesome is the same carrier, and they're likely going to do that whole freight hostage thing. It's stupid. It really is stupid. In all my years of transportation, we've never held freight hostage. The one thing we did do, and was we had a carrier, or we had a customer, not even a broker, a customer, a direct customer, that contacted us and said, they hired us to make a delivery. When we went to make the delivery, it required a lift gate. And because it wasn't a dock-to-dock thing, it required a lift gate. And we were like, okay, we have a lift gate charge that you have to pay us. And they were like, no, we're not paying a lift gate charge. And I'm like, well, you have to. I mean, and I think it was driver assist too. So I was trying to charge them like $200, right? And the customer refused. They're like, you should have known, you should have Googled the address. And I mean, we should have. But I think they had a loading dock there, but for some reason they wanted it to be offloaded down, like with a lift gate. So long story short, I ended up getting into it with this customer and just deciding, say, I'm not delivering your freight anymore. Like, straight up, I'm not delivering it. It's at my warehouse in Patterson, New Jersey. Come pick this crap up. I'm not delivering. And they're like, what do you mean we're not delivering? And then I was like, and by the way, you're paying us a line haul. Otherwise, I'm not releasing the freight. And they were like, blah, blah, blah. And they went back and forth for a long time. And I ended up settling, because finally the customer ended up being like, all right, I'm wrong here. It's been a bad day, whatever. So I think we discounted the delivery. At that point, I was just dead set. I wasn't delivering it for him. But I think because that's when we were doing the cross bulk consolidation stuff. So I think we knocked off like $500 off of the one pallet. Like, we knocked off like $500 so they could deliver it again. And to be honest, we got more freight from that customer. Or actually, they attempted to give us more freight after that. I don't think we ever took it. But that's the closest I ever came. I mean, I've heard horror stories about these people holding freight hostage and things like that, because it can run a business to the ground. And a lot of people do it. I remember when I had my new brokerage, we hired a carrier to deliver some heavy ass piece of equipment. And the deal was 50% after they pick up, 50% at delivery. Well, after they picked up, we wired them the 50%. This is what happens when you're a new broker. Typically, you have to pay everything out up front. And luckily, I had good customers at that time that would do the same thing. But I remember with a heavy ass piece of equipment they picked it up. It was a big oversized load. We wired them the 50% after they picked up. And then they decided that they needed the other 50% before they even went to delivery. And I was like, that's not what we agreed to. It's not what's in the rate con. It's not what we agreed to at all. The other one, you can call me when you're at the receiver, send me a picture before you even offload, and I'll wire it to you. But you're not going to get away with a $250,000 piece of machinery and the payment. And that was the closest. Like, I really had to go back and forth with them. And I think what I ended up doing is because it was a lot of money too, and I was a new broker, so I had no real credit in terms of the brokerage side. So I think what I ended up doing is I used one of the freight escrow. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a big one back then. You don't hear about it much anymore. But it was essentially like an escrow account for the load. So as soon as the load was delivered and they sent in that POD to the third party, they released the funds. So, and I approved it, they released the funds, and it guaranteed that they had the income. And so, what's funny is we started doing that for every single load. We actually stopped doing prepayments or stopped doing 50% advances and put all the money in escrow. So the second I booked a load, I sent the money to escrow. Escrow would verify the funds to the carrier, and we never had any issues doing it. I wonder what happened to that software, that company, because that was a good one. I know a lot of freight factoring companies try to do the same thing. It's not the same though, because you're giving up a percentage. I think with the escrow one, I think I was paying a flat fee of like $45. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a percentage of the total amount that was in there or anything. And I think that was helpful to allow us to build up. And we ended up brokering, or we ended up signing an agreement for financing. So they would do a freight factoring company would handle. We didn't factor our invoices through them, but we had like a quick pay program through them or something. I don't really remember how it worked, but because I don't like factoring, to be honest. And you guys know, like, there are factoring companies out there that are great companies just because of the whole suite of services that they offer. OTR Capital is not a sponsor of this video. They are the best factoring company that I've ever worked with. They are the best factoring company that carriers that I know have ever worked with. But I also, with that said, if you're going to use a factoring company, and a freight factoring company, for anyone that doesn't know, because we have a lot of people that don't know or don't care about freight factoring is important because it allows people access to their funds quicker, but you're paying an exorbitantly high interest rate for that money, essentially. And I'm not going to go into the whole, maybe I'll do that in a different video, but you have to be very cautious of freight factoring because it's like taking out a payday loan, except for thousands of dollars every single time you factor an invoice, and you're locked into factoring that invoice until you get a release. So it's a pain in the ass, to be honest, but for some people it's a necessity, right? Because it frees up that capital. And a lot of people argue you can build in that rate, or their factoring rate. Say a factoring company charges you 3%, you can build that into your quote to your customer, but ultimately that 3% could be what breaks your bid to the customer because you're trying to charge more. And what if Joe Blow carrier doesn't factor, so he doesn't have to add that 3% in? It's kind of interesting, but I recommend only factoring if you have to. Like, if you can't financially deal with it, I recommend factoring. Otherwise, I don't recommend it at all. But anyway, so this has been your little update for capacity today. Okay, like I said, I'm currently probably pretty close to Tennessee, although right now I'm sitting here, but this is called high tech stuff. But I wanted to make a video and update everyone what's going on and just talk about the trucking industry for a little bit because it is mildly entertaining. And if you've lasted this whole video, what I would like you to do in the comments is just type like what 6 plus 5 is. Just type the answer in the chat so I know that you guys have watched the whole video, because I think that's kind of interesting to do. Also, I don't know if this is going to work while I'm just recording the video, but yeah. So anyway, go do that, and I will see you tonight. Dispatch is calling me. I got to go.